Thanks for joining us this week on episode 4 of What Makes It Fun. This week, we discuss guiding the player. But first, I'm Blake Leftwich.
I'm Mike Utter.
And I'm Matthew Taylor.
All right, so when I say guiding the player, what do I mean? Well, in a game, in a good game, in my opinion, the developer guides you through the experience. And let me give you some examples before we start talking about it. It could be something as simple as a map. You have a map and it has clearly marked your next objective. That was something that happened to me for the first time in the Silent Hill series, which I'm a big fan of. Oftentimes in a cutscene, someone would say, you need to go to the hospital, and then it would show the map and the hospital would be circled, so I always knew exactly where I needed to go. Some other examples would be something that's maybe not as clear, but it's really the same concept. Angry Birds, when you fire your first bird, it leaves a dotted line that shows you its trajectory. So when you fire your next bird, you kind of can go by that first line to slightly adjust your shot. That's an example of the same thing. And even hardcore shooter games, when you're hit with a bullet, there are on-screen visual cues that tell you where that bullet came from. Mm. So can you guys give me some examples of games that have this element?
I think Dead Space was one of those games that was really in the spotlight for a moment for doing something a little bit different and guiding the player, and I think IGN called it the idiot line. But anyway, it was a part in the game where at any time if you were lost and didn't really know about your next objective, you could click in the right joystick and a line would pop up on the floor and your character would rotate to that line and it would show you exactly where you needed to go. And a lot of people had beef with that. I never really had a problem with it. And the thing that was great about it, and just like the map in Silent Hill, is the game never had to go out of its way to say, oh, you'll get here by doing this, by taking a left turn there. There was none of that. So in terms of dialogue or anything, that wasn't crowded. You just knew where you were supposed to go. And in a way, that kind of makes you feel like you're more a part of that world.
But do you guys think it's always a good idea? You know, Matt briefly mentioned that IGN, you know, when Dead Space first came out, that's a major publication calling this little guideline the idiot line. Do you guys think it's a negative? Can it be a negative thing?
I think in Dead Space's case, people really liked it because that game already kind of had a confusing interior where things kind of bled into each other, and there was a lot of backtracking and stuff like that. So I don't think anyone would say that it was a bad thing in that game. I think people just have this, you know, that they want to explore the world and they want to come about it in their own way. And a lot of times if you have an overbearing guidance system, that can just be taken away, that whole element of discovery.
Of course, in this case, though, you're mentioning that was an optional feature, so you're not required to take advantage of it. But of course, sometimes, though, having this sort of features that so easily at hand can sort of make you feel like things could be easier than they really should be. So,
you know, playing devil's advocate, don't you think it's the job of the developer, of the person who crafts the level, to guide you through the experience without having to explicitly show you on a map where you should be going?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of games like Resident Evil 4, everyone credits it as just a great linear sort of ride in the way you experience that game, and it had an excellent way of just sort of constantly having this path in front of you. You always knew where to go, and that was a gentle way of guiding you. And Dead Space and a lot of games like that, you know, that's a little more in your face.
Resident Evil 4 came out at a time when, you know, the Grand Theft Auto games were very popular. When Grand Theft Auto came out, the term Sandbox started being thrown around a lot as this, here's a new way to play video games. You're just given this open world and you can do whatever you want. And, you know, I enjoy that type of game, but I don't think anything for me, and I think I think time and time again this has been proven, the most popular games throughout history. I know things are changing these days, but typically they're these single-player experiences where you have a clear goal as opposed to an open world.
Yeah, I think it's something, though, that it really depends on the player and what really drives them. I mean, I tend to like more linear story-based games, but there are some games I play which have a bit more of a sandbox aspect to them, but there's more of a leveling up type goal there. So you're constantly trying to improve your character or gather more resources. And so I think it really comes down to what the player's preferences are. And in today's world, I mean, there's so many different players, and fortunately there's quite a few different options.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting about those sandbox experiences is the game developer has to account for what the player is going to do in a really different way. Like in Resident Evil 4, they have you on this set path, so they can really make that roller coaster experience where they know you're going to come down this path. Almost they know the exact time because there's nothing really for you to explore. Whereas in a game like Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, they have to account for just having little interesting things in the world for you to find in between missions or whatever. But there are games like Minecraft seems to be the example, and I know we talked about this a little earlier, where that's a really popular experience right now, and it is by far the most sandbox experience that I can think of in terms of your only real goal is don't die, which it's pretty difficult to die in that game. It does guide you in simple ways in saying, build a house before nightfall because enemies are going to come out. Like, that's one of the few ways that game actually guides you, and everything beyond that is just discovery. So it's interesting to see a game like that is really the most sandbox experience I can imagine, because even though people say those things about Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto or any of those open world games, I still think they guide you in some pretty heavy-handed ways.
When I look around, I see, Elder Scrolls is popular, Skyrim is popular, Minecraft is popular, but is it as popular as these experiences where it's like level 1, do this, level 2, do this? Yeah. I still feel like even though those games have a lot of hardcore followers, the most successful games seem to have a more narrow path.
Well, we can't forget about Call of Duty just because it's unbelievably popular. And Call of Duty, the games by Infinity Ward that everyone loves, are really famous for their multiplayer, but their single experiences are marked by what people call set pieces, which were a moment in the game where, you throw away your gun and hop on a motorcycle, whatever, and start this whole segment of the game. And it's this thing that's set in the game. It's this little ride. And those games are very linear in their single player, and people really enjoy those games. So you're certainly right that I still think, regardless of multiplayer aspects, which are obviously getting all the news coverage, I do think that you're right. Single player, really linear experiences, with the exception of Grand Theft Auto, are still reigning supreme in terms of popularity.
And don't think I'm just talking about Resident Evil. I'm also talking about, Draw Something, because it's not an adventure game, but it's still an experience that's very crafted. It's step by step, walks you through, do this, do this, do this. You don't have a lot of choices, and those games seem to be just the most popular games instead of something that says, here's a whole world, do whatever you want.
Because the problem with whole world games is, knowing where to focus and how to really craft an experience that the player can enjoy. It's hard to fine-tune something when the options are so open.
Yeah, and on something like the App Store where really the user's only going to is only going to give you 5, maybe 10 minutes to get into your experience, to say, here's this huge open world, now go explore. In an experience like Minecraft, that game doesn't start getting fun until you start to get your bearings, and really about 30, maybe an hour into the game. So I certainly believe that it takes a certain kind of gamer, and that's why those games can't be as popular as something that just instantly says, okay, here's what you do, here's how to do it, now go have fun with these mechanics that we've given you.
Matt, dig around in that mailbag over there, see if you can find anything.
All right. Well, Scott, a regular listener, writes this when asked the question whether or not he prefers linear or sandbox game. He says, I think this is game dependent, but often there needs to be a balance between the two. Final Fantasy X is an example of too much linear gameplay without enough freedom. This game was so linear and repetitive that I got bored, never finished it, and haven't come back to the series since. On the other hand is the Elder Scrolls series. For me personally, this game is too open. I have a need to try and do everything the best way. I also try to complete all side quests and explore all the buildings I come across. Due to this, I have never been able to complete one of these games. One exception to the need for balance, though, is Minecraft, which is a complete sandbox with no real objectives. I absolutely loved the experience. It's funny how mining well below the surface in the depths of a cavern can be so relaxing and enjoyable. Also, part of what makes the game so enjoyable is that you have no guide and have to figure out how to survive on your own. So for me personally, I feel like I enjoy games the most that have no real expectations and are as open as possible are games that are linear, but with enough freedom not to feel stuck in a continual story, but not too much freedom that I lose track to the point of the game.
Thanks for writing us, Scott. Yeah, Minecraft.
I could talk about it all day. Minecraft, he's right. That game only guides you in saying, bad guys come out at night, so build a house, build some sort of shelter to keep yourself safe. That's the only way that game guides you. And though there are some tutorials on the 360 version, on the PC, I believe you just immediately jump into a world and you're just on your own. And of course, you could go to some website and find out about it, but where's the fun in that? So I agree with what he says about Minecraft, which is just how fun a game can be when it just throws you into the experience. Because so few games do that, it's really unique.
Yeah, I can give you a great example of that. A game that I created called Prehistoric Times. I created this for the Atari 2600, but I created it in 2009 as part of the homebrew community. I specifically in that game, because I loved the Atari days, because a lot of games, especially if you didn't read the manual, which as a kid I never did, a lot of times you had to figure out exactly what was happening, and that was part of the experience. Mm. In Prehistoric Times, the first screen allows you to hunt creatures for food, but in the manual I kind of cryptically refer to another adventure. It says you may continue on a quest if you choose to, but I don't really tell anyone what is that quest. But actually in the game there are 2 other screens hidden, and there are other challenges, even though the manual focuses mainly on the hunting aspect of the game. And I wonder if that's something we're going to lose with being guided, it becoming the standard to have tutorials and being guiding. Are we going to lose that sense of discovery that's so great in gaming?
Well, fortunately, it's usually a skip button, so you can. I guess sometimes the tutorial's embedded into the gameplay, but
yeah, I was going to bring that up. I was just going to ask you guys what you think about tutorials in general. But before we get to that, do you think that we will the days of discovering what I'm supposed to be doing in this game, do you think that's a thing of the past?
Well, it's interesting because we're going to mention Grand Theft Auto 1,000 times, but that's the first thing people think of when they think of open world. And when I think of open world, I think of discovery, finding these things in the game. But
exploration.
It's getting right.
Exploration in games. It seems to be. I know I'm obviously a big fan of this console, but the PlayStation 2, there were a lot of those third-person adventure games where you actually got to explore a world, and it wasn't as focused on action. And that's part of the discovery. That's part of the fun of discovering what's around each corner.
And the interesting thing is that these open-world games are kind of, when I jump into an open-world game now, I kind of have an idea of the experience that's in front of me, and I kind of already know that I'm going to explore a little bit, and hopefully they'll have something interesting to show me, and then someone's going to give me a mission. That sense of discovery is kind of disappearing in open world games because open world games is kind of becoming a genre that I don't think it should be.
Also, they're just so huge these days that you have to be guided through them,
right?
Or you're completely lost.
Although one thing I wonder there are these Sandbox type games. Is it really something new? I mean, I'm just thinking back to the original Ultima series on the Commodore 64 or Apple IIs, and you could actually explore a large world at that point on the different cities and dungeons. And is it something really new, or is it something that we've sort of rebranded and packaged together as a new genre?
Yeah, I think that's something that happens in games a lot, where as a marketing technique, we look for whatever we can to say that's a bullet point, that's a feature, and because of that, I think that's true. We call a lot of features new that aren't new at all. You can almost find an example of every gameplay element in classic games. That's absolutely true. I agree with that.
One thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit is just that you can have exploration and discovery in a really linear experience. And one of the best examples I can give is Eco, which is a very linear game. It has puzzles that require you to backtrack occasionally. But other than that game has a real sense of discovery. And I know that's a game that you could talk about, Blake.
Yeah, in that game you were allowed to explore the world but there were always very specific puzzles you had to accomplish to get to the next section. So you did get a sense of exploration. So you were guided. Yeah, you're right. It was a good balance between being guided explicitly, still allowing you to do a little exploration.
Yeah, and the thing about that game is that you're right, there were specific puzzles, but you would be surprised how abstract that game could seem standing next to something like Uncharted. Like when you get to a puzzle segment in Uncharted, a character is literally going to say, I guess we should start to figure this out. Like they really clue you in that this is a puzzle, here's the room that it takes place in, figure it out. And Eco is very abstract and just giving you this world, and maybe you get to the end of a path and you realize, I can't get any further, and that's when you turn around and see what you can change. But that's a great example of lots of exploration, lots of discovery, lots of a sense of awe in the game, while still being linear.
I think that's why that game is a cult classic, is because there's very little dialogue. It leaves a lot to the imagination, and it does guide you. Sometimes there are even camera angles that kind of are showing you, hey, here's where you need to go, but you just don't have someone explicitly tell you that, or you don't have a map showing you. Subject of classic games, which I absolutely love, let me just say Adventure was an open world game too. I love the Atari 2600. Matt brought it up a while ago when we weren't recording. But Adventure was such a great game, and it was kind of an open world experience. I had to figure out what is this bridge, I had to figure out, well, first of all, I'd say, what are these blocks on the screen? Then I'd say, it allows me to do this. You figure out how each item works, and then you figure out how to use those items to accomplish the goal of the game. You don't even know what the goal of the game is in that game, but because of good level design, you eventually, if you explore the whole world, you're going to know exactly what you need to do. Your ultimate goal ends up being where you start. So naturally, when you get what is obviously the ultimate goal in that game, no spoilers, you know to bring it back to your home castle, and that's how you beat the game. So good level design wins out every time. In my opinion, that is the best way to guide the player. And on that note, we'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to join in this discussion and more, visit us at whatmakesitfun.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. And for the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at whatmakesitfun. And drop us an email at mail@whatmakesitfun.com while you're at it. Matt, is there any other way they could get in touch with us?
You can call us. And that's like my favorite way for you to get in touch with us. You can call us at 331-222-WMIF, and that way, if we like what you said, we'll play it on the show.
All right, that's it. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Have a great week.